My name is Aiden, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my parents. Last winter, they left town to attend my uncle's wedding, but I had to stay behind because of my upcoming send-up exams. I didn't mind being home alone. I was used to the silence, and it gave me time to focus on my studies. But that night, I experienced something I still can't explain, something that haunts me every time I close my eyes. That day started like any other. I woke up at 6 p.m. since my sleep schedule had flipped completely due to late-night studying. The evening air was crisp, and a fresh layer of snow blanketed the neighborhood. As always, I went for a walk around the block to clear my mind before breakfast. The streets were eerily silent, with only the occasional distant barking of a dog. After about 30 minutes, I returned home, made some toast and eggs, and ate while scrolling through my phone. The house felt strangely empty without my parents around, but I had gotten used to it over the past couple of days. After breakfast, I spent most of my time gaming. Hours passed, and before I knew it, it was already 2 a.m. The night outside was completely still, the only movement coming from the gentle snowfall. I decided it was time to get serious and start studying. I moved to the drawing room, which had the best lighting, and spread out my books on the coffee table. The large windows beside me showed nothing but white darkness, the snowfall thickening as the night went on. Everything was normal until I heard it. A loud bang echoed from the backyard. My head snapped up, my heart suddenly pounding. It wasn't the sound of something falling. It was as if someone had slammed something heavy against the wooden fence. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether I should check. Finally, I grabbed my phone and cautiously walked to the back door. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me instantly. The backyard was silent. Snow covered the ground in an unbroken blanket. There were no footprints, no signs of movement. My breath formed small clouds in front of me as I scanned the yard, waiting, listening. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of winter. I exhaled, shaking my head at my paranoia, and went back inside. I decided to grab a glass of water from the kitchen before continuing my studies. As I stood by the sink, drinking slowly, I kept glancing at the window. A strange feeling crept up my spine. Something was off. But I pushed the thought aside and went back to the drawing room. An hour passed before it happened again. A soft, deliberate knock on the front door. My entire body tensed. The knocking wasn't urgent. It was slow, almost rhythmic. When I finally reached it, I took a deep breath and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door slightly and peered outside. The front porch was empty, the snow undisturbed. A chill ran through me, and I quickly shut the door, locking it this time. My hands were shaking slightly as I stood there, staring at the handle, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the house remained silent. Something wasn't right. I needed to check outside, just to be sure. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the backyard again, my breath coming out in short puffs. The backyard was exactly as I had left it, untouched. Still, I felt watched. The silence felt too heavy, too unnatural. My skin prickled with an instinctive fear I couldn't explain. Then I turned to the front of the house, and there I saw large footprints in the snow. But they weren't normal footprints. They only had 3 toes, each ending in a sharp point. My throat went dry as I followed their path. They started at my front porch, moved toward the backyard, and then vanished. The prints didn't lead anywhere. It was as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply disappeared into thin air. I felt frozen in place, my breath shallow. I turned and sprinted back into the house, locking every door and window. My heart was hammering in my chest as I grabbed my phone to call the police. But the screen was dark. The power had gone out. The entire house was plunged into darkness, and I had left my phone upstairs in my bedroom. I stood there, my body rigid, trying to control my breathing. The only sound was the wind howling outside. My only option was to wait until morning. I crawled under the table in the living room, trying to steady my nerves. My hands clenched into fists, every sound amplified in the silence. Then I heard it. The front door creaked open. I knew I had locked every door. How had it opened? I held my breath, listening. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the hallway. Someone had entered my house. My body screamed at me to run, but I stayed frozen, my mind racing. Then I made a decision. I couldn't just sit there. I had to get out. In one swift motion, I bolted from under the table, ran to the nearest window, and threw it open. The icy wind hit my face as I scrambled outside, my feet sinking into the snow. I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning from the cold. After a few minutes, I dared to glance back. 2 figures stood in my house. One loomed in the drawing room window, its massive, shadowy form watching me. The second stood on the porch, barely illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlight. Neither of them moved. I ran straight to my neighbor's house, pounding on the door with frantic urgency. When they finally opened it, I rushed inside, barely able to speak. They called the police and my parents immediately. The next day, my parents arrived, and the police conducted an investigation. But there was nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints inside the house, no evidence that anything had been there at all. The only thing they found were the strange 3-toed footprints in the snow, leading to nowhere. The case remains unsolved. No logical explanation has ever been found. But I know what I saw, and I know that whatever entered my house that night wasn't human. But the real question is, how did they get inside without opening the door? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I never imagined my life would change so drastically after my parents' death. They died in a terrible car accident 3 years ago, leaving my younger brother and me to fend for ourselves. Our parents had been returning home from a weekend trip when a truck lost control on the icy road and slammed into their car. They died on the spot. I still remember the phone call from the police, the way my stomach dropped, the disbelief. For days, we lived in a fog, unable to process that they were really gone. My younger brother, Jake, was only 19 at the time. I was 24. We had no choice but to step up and take care of each other. I worked as a software engineer for a private firm, while Jake worked part-time at a hardware store while studying in college. Life had been difficult without them, but we managed to get by, relying on each other like we never had before. Our house, the same one we grew up in, often felt empty, but we kept it because it was the last piece of our parents we had left. It was a cold winter night when everything changed. Snow had been falling heavily since the afternoon, covering the streets and rooftops in a thick white layer. I had spent the entire day at the office, drowning in work, while Jake had been running errands. He had mentioned he would be stopping by the grocery store before coming home, so I didn't expect him to be there when I arrived. Pulling into the garage, I let out a tired sigh, relieved to finally be home. But as soon as I stepped out of my car, I noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. My stomach clenched. Had Jake forgotten to lock it? That didn't seem like him. I pulled out my phone and called him immediately.
Hey, did you forget to lock the door?
I asked, stepping cautiously toward the entrance.
What? No.
Jake's voice was firm.
I locked it before I left, and I have the key with me.
I felt a chill creep up my spine.
Well, it's wide open.
Jake was silent for a moment.
Did someone break in?
I don't know. I'm going inside to check.
Wait for me. I'll be home in 5 minutes.
He said quickly, but I was already stepping inside. The house was eerily silent, colder than usual. My breath fogged in the air as I moved through the living room. Everything looked exactly the same. Nothing out of place, nothing missing. It was unsettling. If someone had broken in, why hadn't they taken anything? I went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and tried to shake off the unease settling in my chest. By the time Jake arrived, I had convinced myself it was just a freak accident. Maybe the wind had somehow blown the door open. Jake stepped inside, scanning the house with narrowed eyes.
Are you sure nothing's missing?
I nodded. Everything looks fine, just weird. Jake still seemed uneasy, but when his phone rang a few minutes later, he sighed.
It's Ryan. He needs me to drop something off at his place. I'll be back soon.
Be careful, I told him as he grabbed his coat and disappeared into the night. By midnight, the storm had worsened. Wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I decided to watch some TV in the living room to relax. An hour passed, and just as I was about to switch it off and go upstairs, I heard it. A knock at the door. It was slow, deliberate. My pulse quickened. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitating, I peeked through the peephole. A man stood outside. He was bundled up in a thick coat, a beanie pulled low over his head. Snow clung to his clothes, and his breath curled in the frigid air. "Hey, man," he called out, his voice hoarse. "My car broke down nearby, and my phone's dead. Can I stay here just for the night? The storm's too strong." Something about his voice unsettled me. It was deeper than it should have been, almost unnatural. My instincts screamed at me not to open the door, but I didn't want to seem heartless.
I don't think I can let strangers in.
I said cautiously.
Maybe I can call for help?
The man chuckled, tilting his head slightly. "There's no signal right now because of the storm. Just let me in for a few hours. I won't cause any trouble." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. He stepped inside, shaking the snow off his coat. His eyes darted around the house, scanning every corner. Something about the way he observed the room sent another wave of unease through me. I gestured toward the guest room.
You can stay there for the night.
I said.
I'll grab you a blanket.
He nodded, offering a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I went to the storeroom, picked a blanket for the man, and gave it to him. He smiled and thanked me for taking care of him. Trying to shake off my discomfort, I returned to the living room and flipped through channels. After an hour, I landed on a news station.
Breaking news. Authorities are warning residents about a dangerous entity suspected to be a skinwalker roaming the area. Witnesses report eerie encounters with a man who appears normal at first, but behaves strangely upon closer interaction. Residents are advised not to engage and to report any suspicious activity immediately.
The air felt heavier. My mind raced as I glanced toward the guest room door. Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. Could it? Just then, the man's voice called from the guest room. "Hey, can I get some water?" But something was wrong. His voice had changed. It was warped, deeper, almost like two voices overlapping. My hands trembled as I grabbed a glass of water, slipping a few sleeping pills into it before walking toward the room. I handed him the water, avoiding his gaze. He took a sip and gave me that same unsettling smile. "Thanks," he murmured. I left quickly, locking my bedroom door behind me. I had no plans of staying in that house any longer. Grabbing my jacket, I tiptoed toward the front door, ready to bolt to my neighbor's house. But then I saw it. The guest room door was wide open. The man, or whatever he was, stood in the doorway, crouched unnaturally low. His mouth curled into a grin far too wide for a human face. His fingers dug into the wooden chair in the corner, tearing off chunks and chewing them like an animal. Then he stopped. Slowly, he turned his head toward me, his eyes now black voids. I slammed my bedroom door shut, locking it just as he lunged. The door rattled violently, but no sound came from his movements. No footsteps, no breathing, just an eerie silence. I dialed the police with shaking hands. By the time they arrived, he was gone. The guest room was destroyed, half the bed eaten, claw marks on the walls. But there was no trace of him. An hour later, Jake returned. I told him everything, but deep down, I knew. The skinwalker wasn't finished with me yet. I never planned on living alone, but life doesn't always turn out the way we expect. My parents' divorce was messy. It wasn't the kind of quiet, mutual separation you hear about. It was loud, bitter, and full of misunderstandings neither of them could let go of. My mother believed my father had been hiding something from her, and my father, in return, accused her of never trusting him. I was just caught in the middle. When the fighting became unbearable, my father left. My mother never looked back, and soon after she moved to another city, leaving me to decide where I wanted to be. At first I tried staying with my mom, but it never felt like home. My father, on the other hand, vanished from my life entirely. So at 23, I made a choice. I moved into our old family house. It was a modest two-story home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees and eerily quiet streets. Most of the neighbors had moved away over the years, leaving only a few occupied homes nearby. The house itself had a strange emptiness to it, as if it had been holding on to the echoes of the past. I thought living alone would give me peace, but in reality, it made me feel more isolated than ever. I had spent most of the day working from home, and by the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. I went to bed earlier than usual, hoping to catch up on some sleep, but my body wasn't used to it. I had already slept for a few hours in the afternoon, so by the time I lay down around midnight, I found myself just staring at the ceiling, unable to drift off. Then I noticed it, the light from the kitchen spilling faintly under my bedroom door. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure I had turned off all the lights before heading to bed. I hesitated for a moment, listening carefully, but the house was silent. Telling myself I had probably forgotten, I got up, walked down the hall, and peered into the kitchen. It was empty. The light was on, but nothing was out of place. No signs of forced entry. I shook my head, switched it off, and went back to my room. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had left it on without realizing it, but sleep still wouldn't come. My mind was restless, and the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. The hours passed slowly, and by the time the clock hit 5 p.m., I gave up. I had been awake all night, and my stomach was starting to remind me that I hadn't eaten much all day. I decided to order a pizza and kill some time watching my favorite TV show. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. The delivery guy handed me the box. I paid him, and he left with a quick nod. Nothing unusual. I took the pizza to the living room, sat down, and flipped on the TV. Just as I was about to take my first bite, I felt it. A presence. It was a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. My eyes instinctively darted to the window, and that's when I saw him. An old man stood outside, staring at me through the glass. But the moment our eyes met, he moved. Not walked, not ran, just disappeared. I rushed to the window, but there was no sign of him. No footsteps in the dirt, no movement in the shadows. My stomach twisted with unease. The logical part of my brain told me it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been standing there watching me eat, and now he was gone. My heart pounded as I backed away from the window. The pizza sat untouched on the table. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, trying to steady my breathing. When the officers arrived, they did a full sweep of the property but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no strangers lurking around. They assured me it was probably just a homeless man passing through and advised me to keep my doors locked. That was supposed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. 2 days later, I stayed late at work, trying to distract myself from the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. It was already dark by the time I started driving home. My phone rang just as I turned onto my street. It was my best friend, Mark. "Dude, why aren't you opening the door?" I frowned. "What?" "I've been knocking for like 5 minutes," he said, sounding confused. "I saw you go inside. What's up?" My grip on the steering wheel tightened.
Mark, I'm not home.
Silence. Then, in a shaky voice, he said, "I just saw you. You were standing in the garden. The second I got closer, you turned and went inside." My blood turned ice cold. I hit the gas and sped home, my hands shaking. When I pulled into the driveway, Mark was standing there, his face pale as a ghost. He looked at me, then back at the house. "You were just inside," he whispered. "I swear to God I saw you." We exchanged nervous glances before stepping toward the front door. Something about the house felt wrong. I stood frozen outside my house, staring at my friend, who was just as terrified as I was. He had seen someone, no, he had seen me, inside my house just minutes ago. But I was standing outside, right in front of him. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on my chest, making it hard to breathe. We exchanged nervous glances before deciding to investigate. I unlocked the front door. The The air inside was thick and heavy, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. We cautiously stepped inside, my friend gripping my shoulder for reassurance. The house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made my ears ring. We checked every room, but everything seemed normal. Just as we were about to dismiss it as paranoia, a noise came from the basement, a soft, shuffling sound, like someone moving in the dark. I swallowed hard and glanced at my friend. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, we should check it out." We moved toward the basement door, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wooden stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into the dimly lit basement. The musty air smelled of old wood and damp concrete. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb had burned out. "Use your phone light," my friend whispered. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The basement looked undisturbed, with dusty boxes and old furniture lining the walls. But then as I swept the light across the far side of the room, my stomach dropped. Two shadowy figures stood by the basement window, completely still. Their features were obscured, but I could feel them watching us. My friend let out a sharp breath, taking a step back. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking. They didn't respond. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring. Then, without warning, the basement door slammed shut behind us. The sound echoed through the room, making my blood run cold. My friend rushed to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "We're locked in," he shouted. Panic surged through me. We turned back toward the figures, but they were gone. The basement was empty. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone to call the police. No signal. My friend tried his phone. Same thing. We were trapped, cut off from the outside world. Suddenly, we heard something move behind the boxes. A deep, guttural breathing. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a cold presence near me. My friend grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." We looked around desperately. The only way out was the small basement window. I climbed onto an old table and struggled to push the window open. It was rusted shut. My friend joined me, both of us using all our strength until it finally gave way. "You go first," I said, boosting him up. He squeezed through and landed outside. I scrambled after him, just as something in the darkness lunged toward me. I felt cold fingers brush against my ankle as I tumbled out, crashing onto the ground beside my friend. We bolted from the house, not daring to look back. Once we were a safe distance away, we called the police again. This time, the call went through. When the police arrived, they searched the house but found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No strange figures. Nothing. But we knew what we had seen. We knew we weren't alone in that house. I never stepped foot in that house again. The next day, I packed my things and left, breaking my lease without a second thought. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to be as far away from that place as possible. To this day, I still don't know who or what was in that house with me. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up with the feeling that someone is watching me, standing just outside my window, waiting for me to notice them.